Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Thomas stepped into the kitchen, the muted light casting elongated shadows across the countertops. It was late, and he'd just returned from work, exhausted but driven by a mounting sense of unease that had been creeping into his mind for days now. Emily and Ryan were there, their laughter low and intimate, overlapping in a way that seemed too close for comfort. Emily turned, surprised by his entrance, her eyes wide with something between alarm and guilt that she tried to disguise with a quick smile. Thomas felt the weight of doubt solidify, the suspicion he'd tried to push away finally taking shape. Every interaction he'd noticed over the past few weeks now seemed to rush back to him. A glance held a moment too long, the way they would fall silent whenever he entered a room. Emily's phone always turned away from him, as if to shield its screen. The images and sounds pieced together in his mind, creating a pattern he couldn't ignore. After a tense exchange of small talk, he made his way upstairs. The air felt thick, each step heavier than the last as he finally decided to confirm his suspicions. Emily's phone lay on the bed, the screen still unlocked. He picked it up, and with a shivering hand, opened her recent messages. There it was, the betrayal he dreaded but couldn't ignore. Messages from Ryan, explicit and undeniable, recounting memories Thomas had no part in. Every word cut deeper, the pain twisting into a cold fury that hollowed him out. He closed the phone, his hand steady as he set it on the table. He would confront them, but not in the heat of anger. He'd make sure they felt the weight of what they had done. In that moment, the course of his actions became clear, and he steeled himself for what was to come. Thomas stood in the dim kitchen, the silence between the three of them swelling, thick with tension and unspoken truths. He watched as Emily and Ryan exchanged glances, each attempt to maintain their calm faltering under his scrutiny. The hints he had once brushed aside now loomed larger, too glaring to ignore. Their voices dropped when he was nearby. Their laughter seemed forced and awkward in his presence. And Emily's phone, a device that had once been left around the house, was now guarded, always face down and within her reach. Thomas leaned back against the counter, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. He glanced at Ryan, his own brother, trying to find a trace of remorse or guilt, but he saw only a practiced ease in Ryan's expression. It was the kind of calm one wore when they believed their deception was too well hidden to ever be exposed. Thomas felt a slow burn of anger in his chest, stoked by their nonchalance, their casual lies simmering under the surface of their smiles. He remembered the early days, how close they had all been. Emily, laughing at Ryan's quick-witted humor, Ryan coming over unannounced, filling the house with energy and laughter. Thomas had trusted both of them. They were his family, his confidants. That was what made this all so twisted, so searing. For weeks, he dismissed his suspicions as paranoia, an overreaction to the subtle shifts in Emily's behavior. But now he saw how carefully each of them had played their parts. When Emily stepped out of the room, Thomas seized the moment to look at Ryan, keeping his voice low but unyielding. "You're here a lot these days," he observed, his words casual, almost indifferent, yet charged with a meaning that Ryan couldn't ignore. Ryan shrugged, deflecting, his smile too bright, too rehearsed. That night, while Emily slept, Thomas retrieved her phone, half convinced he might find nothing, half hoping, even. But as he scrolled, the reality unfolded in raw detail, Ryan's name appearing again and again in her messages, a pattern of intimacy and familiarity that no brother should share with his sister-in-law. The words were enough to strip away any doubt, each one a stark reminder of his misplaced trust. It was a brutal kind of clarity. He placed the phone on the table in front of him, his mind racing through scenarios, each one darker than the last. But revenge could wait. He wouldn't confront them in anger. No, he would let them squirm, let them confront their own guilt. He would strip them of the comfort of ignorance, just as they had stripped him of the comfort of trust. Thomas spent the next few days in silent observation, studying the small cracks that now revealed themselves with sickening ease. Every glance Emily stole at Ryan, every shared laugh, every fleeting touch became a mark of their betrayal etched deeper into his memory. He could feel the anger mutating, sharpening into something cold, calculating. The warmth of his love for Emily had burned away, leaving only a dark, frigid resolve. He would wait for the right moment, the moment they least expected, and expose their lies where they would feel it most. In the days that followed his discovery, Thomas moved through his own life with the quiet, careful precision of a hunter tracking prey. He played his part flawlessly, every smile and nod toward Emily and Ryan calculated to hide the growing storm within him. To the outside world, he seemed unchanged, calm, composed, and busy with his usual routines. But inside, he simmered with a cold, unrelenting fury, and every interaction with them was a reminder of their betrayal. He began noticing details he had previously overlooked. The way Emily would silence her phone as soon as he entered the room, the fleeting looks she and Ryan exchanged when they thought he wasn't watching. Each glance was like a spark, igniting his sense of betrayal and sharpening his focus. He even started planning his words, rehearsing how he would confront them, ensuring each line would cut deep. But he wasn't ready yet. There was a dark satisfaction in holding on to the secret, in watching them lie to him, unaware of how much he knew. One evening, he arranged for a small family gathering at their home. It was nothing extravagant, a simple dinner for the three of them and his parents, who lived just across town. Ryan arrived early, as always, his charm effortlessly slipping into conversation. Thomas poured him a drink, masking the bitterness he felt as he handed him the glass. Emily, too, played her part, her laughter and warmth on display for the family to see. But beneath her easy smiles, Thomas saw the strain, a subtle flicker in her gaze whenever she looked at him too long. Throughout the evening, Thomas used the opportunity to lay subtle traps. He directed questions at Ryan, slyly probing, asking about his life, his schedule, his future plans. He took mental note of every lie his brother casually delivered, cataloging each contradiction with grim satisfaction. It was strange to watch Ryan, his own flesh and blood, betray him so easily, lying to his face with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. There was something deeply unsettling in how natural it all seemed to him, as if he truly believed Thomas was too naive to suspect anything. At one point, Emily and Ryan were left alone in the kitchen. Thomas positioned himself just outside the door, straining to hear their conversation. Their voices were low, but he caught fragments, enough to confirm that they were discussing something more than just the evening's dinner. A nervous laugh from Emily, a hushed reassurance from Ryan, everything about their interaction was laced with an intimacy that twisted the knife deeper. Thomas withdrew, feeling the cold grip of determination settle in his chest. They had fallen into his trap of believing he was oblivious, and they were none the wiser. The evening ended without incident, his parents leaving unaware, and Ryan soon following. Thomas lingered in the silence of the empty house, replaying every moment, every lie in his mind. His patience was paying off, and now he knew when he chose to reveal the truth, it would be devastating. As he locked up for the night, his mind turned to the next step in his plan, a way to expose them both that would leave them no room for denial. It was time to gather his own evidence, to seal their fate in the eyes of everyone they held dear. Thomas's resolve solidified into action as he began gathering the proof he would need to confront Emily and Ryan. He was no longer a mere husband betrayed, he was now a man on a mission, driven by the need to expose their lies with undeniable, unforgiving clarity. Each day, while Emily went about her usual routines, he took quiet steps to ensure their carefully crafted deceit would unravel in a way neither of them would see coming. One evening, he set up a small, discreet camera in the living room, a place where Ryan and Emily often spent time together when they thought he wasn't around. The device was hidden among the books on the shelf, angled perfectly to capture the couch where they sat too close, their conversations barely audible from the hallway. Thomas didn't feel guilt over spying on his own wife and brother. Any sense of morality or remorse had been burned away by their betrayal, leaving only a cold drive for justice. He wasn't going to confront them until he had everything he needed to make them face the truth they had so easily twisted. The following days were tense, each moment at home stretching longer as he quietly observed them. Thomas made a habit of stepping out for work early, leaving Emily and Ryan alone in the house under the pretense of a longer commute. He would return quietly, listening from the doorway, catching the soft murmur of their voices from the next room. Sometimes he would hear a laugh or an affectionate tone in Emily's voice that he hadn't heard directed at him in months. Each interaction he witnessed, even from the edge of a doorway, only served to harden his resolve. To further his plan, he began collecting their digital traces. In Emily's phone, which she now kept under tight guard, he would occasionally manage to find brief moments of opportunity when she left it unattended. He quickly learned to scan through her messages, emails, and call logs without leaving a trace, and each time, he discovered more confirmation of their deceit. He also knew Ryan used a private messenger app, and he began to piece together the times and locations of their meetings, looking for patterns. Each bit of evidence, though small on its own, was building a story one they couldn't deny. Thomas's nights grew restless, haunted by memories twisted into betrayals. He would lie awake, imagining Emily and Ryan's reactions when he finally confronted them. It was almost theatrical in his mind. Every piece of evidence, each screenshot, each recorded conversation, all revealed in a single, brutal moment that would tear through their fences. The idea brought a dark satisfaction, a strange sense of peace amid the pain. It was no longer about salvaging anything, it was about closure, about watching their lives collapse under the weight of their own actions. By the end of the week, he had accumulated everything he needed. His heart pounded as he reviewed his collection, the texts, the videos, the times and places. There was no more ambiguity, no more doubts. The truth sat before him, stark and undeniable, ready to be revealed. Soon, he thought, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. Soon, they would face the betrayal they had crafted so carefully. And this time, there would be no escape. With his evidence secured, Thomas's next move was to ensure there would be an audience to witness the truth he was about to unleash. He knew that merely confronting Emily and Ryan alone wouldn't be enough. They could deny, backpedal, or twist the story in their favor later. But if their family saw everything unfold, there would be no refuge, no sympathy for their lies. This had to be a definitive exposure, one that would strip away any illusions they had of salvaging their reputations. The opportunity presented itself in the form of an upcoming family gathering, a birthday celebration for Thomas and Ryan's mother. The family would be gathered, a perfect setting for his reveal. Thomas took care to mask his intentions, acting as if everything were normal, even cheerful. In their parents' eyes, he was still the same Thomas, the devoted son and dependable husband. Only he knew what lay beneath his calm exterior. In the days leading up to the gathering, he carefully planned every detail of how he would unveil the evidence. He copied the most damning messages, the incriminating photos, and saved them onto a flash drive. For good measure, he also made physical copies, printed out in black and white to strip away any hint of sentimentality. Each piece of evidence would speak for itself, clear and stark, leaving no room for explanations or excuses. The morning of the gathering, Thomas woke early, his nerves on edge but his determination unshaken. He reviewed everything one last time, rehearsing how he would reveal each item, envisioning the moment he'd lay everything on the table. He didn't want anger to cloud his actions. This had to be done with cold precision. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, about revealing the depth of betrayal without sparing a single detail. Arriving at his parents' house, he felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket like a talisman. His mother greeted him warmly, and he hugged her, struck momentarily by the bittersweetness of the situation. She had always been proud of him, of his stability and loyalty. She would never have imagined this kind of rift between her sons. But it was too late for second thoughts. As he greeted Ryan, Thomas maintained a neutral expression, though he felt a surge of contempt simmering beneath his calm. Ryan greeted him with a familiar, easy smile, oblivious to the storm about to descend on him. Once everyone had gathered, laughter and conversation filled the room. Thomas waited, biding his time, studying Emily and Ryan's interactions, every stolen glance and whispered comment. They truly believed they were safe, untouchable, and that was what fueled him to move forward. After dinner, as the family gathered in the living room, Thomas saw his moment. He took a deep breath, his mind sharpening with icy clarity as he stood. "There's something I need to share with everyone," he began, his voice steady but low. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him in curiosity. Without hesitation, he pulled out the flash drive. "It's about Emily and Ryan," he continued, keeping his gaze steady, focusing on Emily, who looked puzzled, and Ryan, whose smile wavered. "I've recently discovered something I believe all of you deserve to know." The silence thickened as Thomas walked to the television, plugging in the flash drive and opening the folder with the damning images and messages. "You'll want to see this," he said quietly, clicking through each piece of evidence, his voice steady as he narrated each message, each meeting, each lie. In the span of minutes, the room filled with a suffocating shock. Emily's face drained of color, her hands trembling, while Ryan's face turned from confusion to horror. Thomas didn't flinch, watching as his carefully prepared revelation dismantled their defenses. His mother's face was a mix of sorrow and disbelief, his father's silent and stern, looking away as if unwilling to accept the truth. Thomas stood back, his part finished, the silence hanging heavily around him. The evidence was clear, each piece speaking louder than any words of his own could. He had shown them for what they were, and now they would have to live with the wreckage. As the silence settled over the room, Thomas stepped back, watching as the reality of his revelation took hold. His parents sat stunned, their expressions shifting between disbelief and a slow, dawning anger. His mother's hands were clasped tightly together, her knuckles white, as though she were holding herself in place against the horror of what she had just witnessed. His father, usually a man of calm reserve, looked rigid and pale, his eyes fixed on Ryan, who now stood paralyzed by the weight of his brother's damning evidence. Emily was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she managed to whisper, "Thomas, please, I didn't mean," but Thomas's eyes cut to her, cold and unyielding, silencing any further pleas before they began. There was no room for her to explain herself, not after the messages and images he had shown to the family, each one a mark of betrayal she couldn't erase. She lowered her gaze, looking away, her face flushed with humiliation and a guilt she couldn't hide. Ryan, for all his charm and smooth-talking ways, was visibly shaken, struggling to find words. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but nothing came. The confidence he usually wore so casually was gone, leaving only a strained, uncertain figure in its place. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the room, and for the first time, he seemed to feel the consequences of his actions settling on him. His usual smirk was nowhere to be found, replaced by a tension in his jaw, a barely contained shame that made him look away, refusing to meet his parents' eyes. Thomas held his silence, his expression calm but unrelenting. He wanted them to feel this moment, to sit with the uncomfortable truth they had created. He had nothing left to say. For weeks he had wrestled with the words, debating what he might tell them, but now he realized that words were unnecessary. The images, the messages, those had already spoken louder than anything he could ever say. All that mattered now was the reckoning unfolding before him. "Is this true?" their father finally asked, his voice low, filled with a fury barely held in check. He looked directly at Ryan, as if waiting for any hint of denial. But Ryan, visibly cornered, simply nodded, his face taut with regret he couldn't undo. Their father's face hardened, the pain of betrayal etched deep into his expression, and he shook his head slowly, as if he could barely recognize the son before him. Emily attempted another apology, her voice trembling. "Thomas, I never wanted it to happen this way. I don't know what came over me." Her words were hollow, falling on ears too tired to listen. Thomas stared at her, his expression blank, unmoved. She realized then that no apology, no explanation could mend what she had done. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the enormity of her actions now lay bare, exposed before the very family she had betrayed. Thomas's mother, who had been sitting in quiet horror, finally looked at her son, her gaze full of sorrow. "Why, Ryan?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. "He's your brother. How could you do this to him?" Her voice carried a quiet devastation, each word a reminder of the trust Ryan had broken. But Ryan only shook his head, lost for words. Whatever he might have said to justify himself felt inadequate, and he knew it. His parents' faces reflected only disappointment, and no excuse could bridge the chasm he had created between them. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him, the familiar warmth of family replaced by a cold distance he had never felt before. Finally, Thomas broke his silence. "You both made your choices," he said, his voice low but steady. "And now you'll face the consequences. I wanted you to feel what it's like to have everyone know, to have no place left to hide." He watched them both, his gaze unwavering as he spoke, and then turned to his parents, his tone softening. "I'm sorry that this had to happen here, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine." He saw the sadness in their eyes, but also the understanding that he had done what he had to do. With that, Thomas stepped back, the weight of his final words lingering in the air, leaving Emily and Ryan to sit in the wreckage of their actions. For them, there would be no easy forgiveness, no chance to erase the betrayal they had sown. In the days following the family gathering, a heavy silence filled Thomas's life. He had left Emily and Ryan to pick up the pieces of their shattered illusions, refusing to answer any of their desperate attempts to contact him. His phone rang repeatedly with their calls, each one a plea for forgiveness or an explanation he had no desire to hear. The damage was done, and he felt no obligation to entertain their words any longer. The finality of his decision settled over him like armor, shielding him from the emptiness left behind by the loss of his marriage and his brother's betrayal. Thomas's parents were deeply affected, their disappointment and heartbreak reverberating throughout the family. His mother, always the voice of reason and love, had reached out to him several times, her voice quiet, almost pleading, asking if there was any way the family could find peace again. But Thomas knew better. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild, especially when shattered by the very people he had held dearest. He returned to work with a rigid sense of determination, throwing himself into projects, late meetings, and extra hours that left him too tired to think. His colleagues noticed the change. He was quieter, more reserved, and his laughter, once natural and easy, was nowhere to be found. When asked, he would deflect with a quick smile, saying he was simply busy, but those close to him saw the strain etched into his face, the fatigue in his eyes. The betrayal had cut deeply, leaving scars he didn't bother to hide. At night, in the quiet of his empty home, the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on him, filling the silence with memories he couldn't escape. Emily, meanwhile, was reeling. The life she had built with Thomas, all the stability and love she had once shared with him, was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of regret and shame. The family had effectively turned away from her, and the sympathetic glances she used to receive from Thomas's parents were now distant, cold with disapproval. She realized too late that her actions had severed the very connection she had once relied on. No amount of apologies or tearful explanations could restore the bridge she had burned, and she knew it. For the first time, she faced the consequences of her choices without anyone to soften the blow. Ryan's fall was even harsher. Known for his charisma and easygoing charm, he had always been the center of family gatherings, the brother who could make everyone laugh. But now, he found himself ostracized, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Thomas's parents had distanced themselves from him, and his friends, too, had heard whispers of the scandal. He could feel their judgment in the sidelong glances, the awkward pauses in conversation. Ryan had thought his charm and confidence would shield him from the consequences, but he had underestimated the depth of his betrayal and the fallout that followed. One afternoon, Ryan tried one last time to speak with Thomas. He found him at his office, waiting outside, his face drawn with an expression somewhere between shame and desperation. But Thomas's expression was impassive, his gaze cool and indifferent. "I have nothing left to say to you," he told Ryan, his voice flat and final, leaving no room for argument. Ryan's shoulders slumped as he turned and walked away, realizing that he had lost not only his brother's trust but any chance of redemption. Thomas's refusal to reconcile was the end of any hope for restoration. He had given them their moment of reckoning, but forgiveness was a step too far. Emily and Ryan, once central to his life, became ghosts he no longer acknowledged. They had been exposed, and he had seen them clearly for who they were. The betrayal, painful as it was, had sharpened his understanding of the people around him and of his own strength. In the quiet moments that followed, Thomas found a strange solace in his solitude. For the first time, he could see a future that wasn't tethered to the people who had betrayed him. The ties that once bound him had been severed, but in their place he felt a renewed sense of control over his own life. There would be no returning to what once was, no attempts to reclaim the past.